The corridor camera should never lose signal at night. Yet the monitor showed a clean black gap, 30 seconds missing, right outside the West Wing nursery. The royal guard checked the log. No maintenance entry, no override authorization. He paused, eyes fixed on the timestamp. A child's slipper lay beneath the camera, turned heel up as if dropped mid-step. The silence felt deliberate. He reached for his radio, then stopped. The guard sealed the corridor with a quiet efficiency that came from repetition rather than urgency. The palace slept in layers, public halls dimmed to security amber, private wings held in shadow, the West Nursery zone reduced to standby lighting that softened edges and lengthened corners. He keyed his badge at the access panel and waited for the soft confirmation tone. It came late, as if the system hesitated. He logged the delay without comment. At the security desk, he pulled the CCTV stream onto a secondary monitor and isolated the feed. 30 seconds were gone, not static, not distortion. A clean excision like a page removed from a book without tearing. He ran diagnostics. Power uninterrupted, network stable. The cut had been executed locally with credentials. He checked the access log again. No maintenance ticket, no supervisor override. No emergency code. The absence felt heavier than an error would have. Errors left fingerprints. He rewound to 10 seconds before the blackout. The camera showed the nursery corridor as it should be. Doors closed, floor polished to a dull sheen, night hush undisturbed. Then in the reflection of the picture rail, warped by varnish and angle, something moved. He slowed the playback to frame by frame. The movement resolved into a pale shape, small hands raised, fingers splayed, pressed to glass, not the lens, the glass of a framed print opposite the camera, a child's height. He froze the frame and leaned closer. The hands were steady, not waving, not banging, a placement deliberate and practiced. He felt the reflex to call it coincidence rise and fall away. Coincidences did not hold still. He marked the timestamp and exported the clip to a secure drive. The system prompted for justification. He selected routine review, a category broad enough to pass and narrow enough to note later. The drive accepted the file and sealed it with a checksum. He pocketed it. Protocol required escalation. He opened the channel to command and requested authorization to investigate a feed interruption. The reply came with professional calm. Acknowledge the anomaly, await instruction, do not proceed independently. The voice belonged to a deputy he respected, measured and careful. No refusal, just containment. He acknowledged and closed the channel. The corridor outside the nursery smelled faintly of polish and linen. The temperature was held a degree warmer than the rest of the wing, calibrated for sleep. He crouched by the camera mount and examined the housing. No prime marks, no tampering. The lens was clean. Beneath it, against the skirting, lay a slipper, small, soft, pale blue, heel-up. The fabric was warm when he lifted it, the warmth fading quickly against his glove. He logged the item and set it back where it lay. Evidence moved too early became explanation later. Footsteps approached, soft-soled, unhurried. He stood and turned as a senior aide came into view, tablet tucked under one arm, expression neutral. They exchanged brief courtesies. The aide glanced at the camera housing, then at the slipper, then away. "Maintenance?" the aide asked. "Routine check," the guard said. It was true enough. The aide nodded, eyes already elsewhere. "The wing is restricted tonight, standing instruction." "Understood." When the aide passed, the guard waited until the footsteps receded, then keyed the access panel to standby. The tone came immediately this time. He took the slipper, sealed it in an evidence sleeve, and placed it in his inner pocket. His radio vibrated once. A short message from command, hold position, further review pending. He looked back at the frozen frame on his handheld, the small hands, the careful placement. He turned the radio face down and listened to the corridor breathe. He did not move for several minutes after the radio message. Holding position could mean seconds or hours. Command used the phrase when they wanted time without saying why. The corridor remained empty. The standby lights hummed at a frequency just below awareness, felt more than heard. Somewhere beyond the nursery doors, air circulated softly, a controlled breath. He returned to the desk and brought up the system permissions. The blackout had been executed with a Level 2 credential, high enough to bypass routine alerts, low enough to avoid the audit flags reserved for emergency overrides. That narrowing troubled him. It suggested familiarity, not haste, someone who knew exactly how far to go and no further. He cross-referenced the credential class against staff schedules. Only 3 individuals had been logged in the West Wing during the hour in question. 2 were accounted for elsewhere by overlapping footage. The third showed a gap, not in presence but in specificity. A movement logged without destination, a walk that began and ended cleanly, with the middle smoothed out by privilege. He flagged the entry for review and watched the system accept it without resistance. The Palace networks did not argue. They recorded. A soft chime sounded at the access panel. He turned as the nursery door opened a fraction, stopped by the interior chain. A nurse's face appeared, pale in the low light, eyes tired but alert. She said nothing at first, just looked at him as if checking for permission to speak. "Is there an issue?" she asked finally, voice low. "Routine," he said again. "Is the child awake?" The nurse hesitated. It was a small thing, half a second too long. "No," she said, settled. He nodded and did not ask to see inside. Requests created records. Instead, he noted the nurse's hands, clean, steady, but clasped too tightly. She closed the door with care and the chain clicked back into place. Command called him back. The deputy's voice was unchanged, but the words carried weight. The interruption had been escalated to internal review. He was to stand down from active inquiry and submit his findings. The matter would be handled. He acknowledged, then sent the file, minus the exported clip and the slipper now warming his pocket. He attached his notes, precise and restrained. Facts only. He did not include his interpretation of the hands. He remained at the desk after the call ended. Standing down did not require leaving. It required obedience. He gave them the first and withheld the second. Minutes later, the wing supervisor arrived, posture formal, tone courteous. They discussed lighting schedules and camera maintenance, the language of normalcy. The supervisor glanced once at the evidence sleeve peeking from the guard's pocket and said nothing. Silence, too, could be instruction. When the supervisor left, the guard reopened the clip on his handheld. He adjusted contrast and angle, enhancing the reflection. The hands became clearer. One finger bore a faint mark, a smudge of red-brown at the nail. Dried, old enough to darken, fresh enough to notice. He closed the file and locked the device. At the end of the corridor, a door opened and closed. Soft footsteps again, measured. He did not turn this time. He felt the presence pass behind him, close enough to disturb the air. No greeting, no challenge, authority moving without needing acknowledgement. The radio vibrated once more. A short update, internal review ongoing, no further action required. He placed the handheld back on the desk and looked at the nursery door. The chain held. The light beneath it did not flicker. He understood then that the missing seconds were not an error to be corrected, but a boundary to be tested. How much could be removed before someone stepped forward? How quietly? He stepped away from the desk and positioned himself where the camera would catch him in profile, present, visible, unremarkable. A guard doing nothing wrong. In his pocket, the evidence sleeve pressed against his ribs, a small, undeniable weight. He waited. The morning briefing passed without incident. Overnight logs were summarized, anomalies softened into technical language, and the West Wing blackout was described as a temporary synchronization error now resolved. The guard listened without comment, eyes on the table, absorbing the phrasing as much as the content. Words mattered here. They shaped what could be questioned later. After dismissal, He requested access to archival training materials, old modules, pre-digital updates that had never been fully migrated. The request raised an eyebrow but was approved. He took a terminal in a side office where the light was flatter and the air cooler, a place used for work that did not need witnesses. He searched for distress protocols designed for nonverbal situations. Most were outdated, retired after audits deemed them unnecessary. One remained, a discreet hand signal taught to a narrow circle, children under protection whose routines required silence. A palm to glass, fingers spread, held, not waved. The note beside it read, "Do not respond immediately, observe for repetition." He closed his eyes briefly and reopened them. The hands in the reflection had been steady, practiced. He reviewed earlier footage from the evening, careful not to trip alerts. Hours before the blackout, the child had passed through the corridor with staff, nothing remarkable at first glance. Then, in a moment between doors, the child paused and lifted one hand, not high, not obvious, toward a framed print. The gesture was quick, almost casual, easy to miss. He slowed it down and watched again. The same placement, the same stillness. A second instance appeared later, nearer to bedtime, again subtle, again unacknowledged. To Cigna. LS, that meant the threshold. He documented the findings privately in a notebook kept for training reflections. Dates, times, observations, no conclusions. He wrote as if someone else might read it one day and need to understand without him present. By midday, pressure arrived in small forms. A polite reminder from administration about access boundaries. A rescheduling of his patrol route away from the West Wing. None of it overt, all of it cumulative. He complied, adjusting his path without protest, learning the edges of the box being built around him. During an afternoon rotation, he encountered a junior guard at the stairwell, newer, still careful with posture. They exchanged routine updates. As they parted, the junior hesitated. "Sir," he said quietly, "the child asked for you last night." The guard stopped, asked how. The junior swallowed. "Just your post, if you were on duty." "Who told you that?" "A nurse," the junior said. "She said it like it didn't matter." "It mattered." He thanked the junior and continued on, the corridor stretching ahead in pale light. He did not return to the West Wing. Not yet. Presence could be provocation. Instead, he requested a review of child protection briefings under the pretext of refresher training. The materials confirmed what he already knew. The signal was valid, rare, and meant to be escalated discreetly. The guidance emphasized restraint, verify, observe, protect without alerting. That night he positioned himself near a secondary monitor that mirrored nursery-adjacent feeds. He did not isolate them. He let them run as intended, accepting the limitations. The camera outside the nursery remained stable. No blackout, no disturbance. Then, just before lights out, the child appeared at the edge of frame, partially obscured by a door jamb. A hand lifted, fingers spread, held. He noted the time. He did not move. Some signals were not requests for rescue. They were confirmations, a way of saying, "I am still here." The reassignment arrived just after dawn. A clean notice, stamped and routine, shifting his primary responsibility from interior night coverage to ceremonial perimeter duty for the remainder of the week. No mention of cause, no expiration date. It was presented as operational balance, the kind of adjustment that looked neutral on paper and decisive in effect. He acknowledged the order without comment. Ceremonial duty placed him where visibility mattered more than access. Broad halls, public-facing corridors, areas thick with cameras and thin on privacy. From there, the West Wing existed only as a notation on a map, a place he was no longer scheduled to see. He adapted his routine accordingly. Arrival times unchanged, equipment checks precise, movements predictable. He became deliberately unremarkable. Pressure followed in subtler forms. His requests for archival materials were delayed. his access credentials refreshed with narrower permissions. None of it improper, all of it lawful. Authority did not need to say no when it could simply say later. By mid-morning, a senior administrator requested a brief conversation. The meeting took place in a glass-walled office overlooking an interior courtyard. The administrator spoke carefully, choosing words that left no edges. "There's concern," she said, "that you may be interpreting routine irregularities through a personal lens." He listened, hands folded, posture neutral. "Our procedures exist to protect everyone involved," she continued, "including the child." He agreed. The statement was true. That was the problem. She advised rest. Rotation fatigue was mentioned. So was discretion. The conversation ended with thanks and a reminder of trust. Trust, he knew, was often invoked when compliance was expected. That afternoon, he reviewed the formal protocol governing child welfare escalations. The language was exacting. Observation required corroboration. Intervention required authorization. Immediate action was permitted only in the presence of imminent physical harm. Emotional distress, unless acute and witnessed, fell into a gray zone managed by specialists. The protocol did not account for signals designed to avoid witnesses. As evening approached, he watched the shift roster update. Another guard was assigned to the West Wing, capable, experienced, and notably compliant. Someone who followed the book as written, not as intended. He considered escalation beyond command. External oversight existed, but invoking it required a threshold he could not yet prove he had crossed. Evidence without context could be reframed. Context without evidence could be dismissed. At dusk, a service corridor intersected his patrol route. He slowed as he passed, listening. The palace carried sound in strange ways, footsteps traveling, doors speaking to one another through walls. He heard a child's voice once, distant and indistinct. It might have been laughter. It might have been nothing. He logged nothing. Later, as lights shifted to even ing mode, his radio crackled with a brief advisory. Restricted access in the West Wing due to a private engagement. No further detail. He stood at his assigned post, eyes forward, aware of every instinct urging him elsewhere. Protocol was not a wall. It was a door held shut by consensus. Breaking it would be noticed. Waiting might not be forgiven. He felt the weight of the evidence sleeve still in his locker, unused and unresolved. From where he stood, he could see the reflection of a distant corridor in polished marble. For a moment, he thought he saw movement, a hand lifted, fingers spread. The reflection shifted, the image was gone. He remained at his post. The witness did not come forward willingly. The guard noticed the change before the words arrived, the way the night staff moved through the service corridor with tighter paths, eyes sliding away sooner than usual. The palace at night depended on routine trust. When that trust thinned, movement became careful. He adjusted his patrol to pass the service lift at the end of the West Junction, a place where staff crossed between duties without ceremony. The lighting there was functional, unflattering. It revealed posture more than faces. A junior attendant stood by the lift doors, hands folded around a linen cart handle. She froze when she saw him, then relaxed too quickly. The guard slowed, not stopping, allowing the moment to breathe. "You're off the West Wing tonight," she said. It was not a question. "Temporarily," he replied. The lift chimed and opened. She did not step inside. He waited. Silence, when held correctly, invited confession without asking for it. "I shouldn't say anything," she said finally, eyes fixed on the floor. "They told us not to speculate." "About what?" he asked, voice level. She swallowed. "About the walking." He stopped. "What walking?" She hesitated again, then spoke faster as if speed might protect her. "During the blackout, I was coming back from Linen's. I heard footsteps in the nursery corridor. Not running, not rushing, just walking back and forth, like someone waiting. "Did you see anyone?" "No, that's the thing." She looked up at him then, eyes wide but controlled. "If it was normal, I would have seen someone. The lights were low but not out, and no one signed the movement log." "Did you report it?" Her mouth tightened. "I mentioned it, later. I was told it must have been staff movement logged elsewhere." He nodded. The explanation fit the system, not the sound. The lift doors began to close. She stepped in at the last second, then turned back. "The child didn't cry," she said quietly. "That's what scared me." The doors shut. He logged the interaction mentally, not electronically. Names could be protected only if they were not written down. Pressure increased after that. Not visibly, not immediately. A subtle tightening of space. His patrol routes overlapped less with service areas. His presence drew longer looks from supervisors who had once ignored him. Someone was mapping his movement as carefully as he mapped theirs. That evening, a senior household official requested his attendance in a side chamber near the administrative offices. The room was designed for discretion: thick curtains, sound-dampening walls, a table placed deliberately off-center. The official spoke with practiced calm. "There are concerns you're drawing conclusions without sufficient scope," she said. "We value vigilance, but it must remain proportionate." He listened. "The child is safe," she continued. "Monitored, cared for. Emotional variance is expected at that age." He asked one question. Were their footsteps logged during the camera interruption? The official's pause was brief but real. "No," she said, which supports the conclusion that nothing occurred. Absence again used as proof. He left the chamber with nothing resolved and everything clarified. The system did not deny the irregularity. It reframed it until action became unreasonable. Later, alone at his locker, he removed the evidence sleeve and examined the slipper again. The fabric held no scent now. The warmth was gone. It had become an object, stripped of immediacy by time and procedure. He placed it back and locked the door. As he turned away, his radio vibrated, an internal message routed privately. "Service corridor, 15 minutes, no cameras." He did not reply. He adjusted his route and walked on, the palace lights dimming around him as if accommodating a choice already made. The service corridor was narrower than the public halls, its ceiling lower, its lights set to a constant white that erased shadows instead of shaping them. He arrived early and stood to one side, back to the wall, where the cameras did not reach. The absence of surveillance felt heavier than its presence. Footsteps approached, unhurried, careful. The junior attendant from the lift stepped into view, alone this time, without a cart or uniform jacket. She stopped several paces away, keeping distance. As if it were policy. "I can't stay long," she said. "I won't ask you to," he replied. She took a breath. They moved the child. Went. After the blackout, not far, still inside the wing but not the nursery, her hands clasped and unclasped once. They said it was for rest, fewer interruptions. "Who said?" She shook her head. "It doesn't matter, it was decided." He nodded. Decisions in this place often appeared fully formed without fingerprints. "Did you see the child?" he asked. "Briefly, this morning." She hesitated. There was a mark on the finger like dried blood. His jaw tightened, but his voice did not change. "Did medical log it?" "They cleaned it," she said, "before the round." She stepped back then, already retreating. "I shouldn't have messaged you." "You did the right thing," he said, not as reassurance but as fact. She gave a small, tight nod and left the way she had come, footsteps swallowed by the corridor's acoustics. He remained where he was, counting the seconds until the system would flag his absence from route. When the count reached its limit, he returned to his patrol with measured pace, mind already moving ahead. The line was clearer now. Not yet imminent harm as protocol defined it, but sustained concealment. evidence altered, movement unlogged, a child taught to signal in silence because sound was unsafe. He reviewed his authority, what it allowed and what it implied. Emergency access could be justified if he could articulate immediate risk. The risk here was cumulative, not explosive. The system preferred fires to slow leaks. At his desk, he drafted a request for temporary access to the West Wing under the pretext of equipment verification. He did not send it. Requests created waiting. Instead, he reviewed the architectural schematics stored in the internal archive. The West Wing had been renovated decades earlier. In the margins of the plans, older routes remained, service passages sealed but not removed, doors disguised as paneling, corridors designed for discretion long before cameras existed. One access point ran parallel to the nursery block, terminating near a private sitting room now used for storage. The lock was mechanical, not biometric, old enough to require a key, new enough to have been overlooked. He checked the key registry. 2 copies existed, one assigned to facilities, one unassigned, its status listed as retained. Retained by whom was not specified. Pressure arrived again, this time in person. A supervisor paused at his desk, posture casual, eyes attentive. "Everything all right?" the supervisor asked. "Yes," he said. "Good, we'll need you on the perimeter tonight. Extended hours." "Understood." When the supervisor moved on, the guard stood and went to his locker. He removed the evidence sleeve and the secure drive, placing both into a concealed pouch beneath his uniform. He added a small torch, the kind that cast light narrowly, without spill. He did not feel resolve in the cinematic sense. No surge, no certainty, only alignment. His instincts and his obligations were no longer in conflict. They had separated, leaving him to choose which failure he could live with. At the edge of his shift, as the palace transitioned into night mode, he altered his route by a margin small enough to look accidental. He walked toward the old wing. The old access door blended into the paneling as intended. Its surface carried the same lacquered finish as the surrounding wall, worn thin at the edges where hands had once known to reach. The guard stopped beside it without looking directly, listening first. The palace at night settled into a different rhythm, systems cycling, distant footsteps measured and rare, the faint exhale of vents moving air through spaces meant to feel timeless. He removed the retained key from the pouch. It was heavier than modern cards, weighty with use. The lock resisted at first, then yielded with a soft, reluctant turn. He eased the door open just enough to slip through and closed it behind him, aligning the seam until it disappeared. The passage beyond was narrow and unlit. He used the torch sparingly, angling it down to catch the floor without announcing his presence. The air was cooler here, dustier, untouched by recent renovation. His boots sounded louder than he liked. He adjusted his steps, placing weight along the edges. The schematic had been accurate. The passage ran parallel to the nursery block, ending near the private sitting room repurposed for storage. As he approached, he heard voices, low, controlled, adult. Not raised, not hurried. Authority rarely needed volume. He stopped short of the door and listened. A pause in the conversation, then movement, a chair scraping lightly. The door opened inward, spilling a rectangle of warm light into the passage. He stepped back into shadow as a senior household official emerged, tablet in hand, expression composed. She closed the door carefully and moved away, footsteps receding toward the main corridor. He waited longer than necessary. When he entered the room, he did so openly. The storage had been cleared enough to resemble a sitting space, chair, low table, lamp adjusted for comfort rather than function. The child sat on the chair, feet not touching the floor, hands folded in their lap. A nurse stood nearby, posture attentive but distant. The child looked up. Recognition flickered and settled into stillness. No cry, no movement toward him, just the steady lift of one hand, fingers spread, held. The signal again. The nurse turned. "You're not assigned here," she said, voice calm, professional. "I'm conducting a safety check," he replied. "Authorization." "Emergency authority," he said, and let the words stand without elaboration. The nurse hesitated, not defiance, calculation. She glanced at the child's hand and then away. "The child is fine," she said. "A minor injury already addressed." He moved closer, stopping at a respectful distance. He did not kneel. He did not soften his posture. He placed himself between the child and the door without touching either. "I need to see the hand," he said. The nurse did not move. The child lowered their hand and extended it instead. A finger bore a faint band of discoloration near the nail, cleaned but not healed. The skin around it was tight, tender. He noted it, he did not comment. "This room isn't logged," he said quietly. "It doesn't need to be," the nurse replied. "It's temporary." "Temporary arrangements are still arrangements," he said. "They require record." The nurse's jaw tightened. She reached for her tablet, then stopped as his radio vibrated once, an incoming call rooted high priority. He did not answer it immediately. The child's other hand curled slightly, then flattened against the chair arm. Not the signal, something else. A restraint learned. He met the nurse's eyes. "I'm staying," he said, not as a threat, as a fact. The radio vibrated again, longer this time. From the corridor beyond the room, footsteps approached, more than one set. The footsteps resolved into three distinct rhythms before the figures appeared. Experience let him separate them without looking, one measured and confident, one lighter and reactive, one deliberately slow. Authority announced itself by refusing to hurry. The senior household official entered first, posture composed, expression neutral in the way that suggested preparation rather than surprise. A legal advisor followed, tablet already active. Behind them, a supervisor from command, eyes alert, taking in the room in a single sweep. The guard stepped aside, just enough to be seen, without clearing the doorway. "This area is restricted," the official said, voice even. "You are out of bounds." "Emergency authority," he replied again. He kept his tone flat, procedural. "There is no emergency," the supervisor said, not dismissive, declarative. "Stand down." The child remained seated, hands folded now, gaze fixed on the floor. The nurse had moved half a step back, creating space without instruction. The guard did not argue. He reached into his uniform and removed the secure drive, placing it on the table between the lamp and the advisor's tablet. He did not slide it forward. He set it down. 30 seconds missing from the nursery corridor feed, he said. "Manual cut. Level 2 credential. No log." The advisor's eyes flicked to the drive, then back to him. He continued. 2 silent distress signals recorded prior to the cut. Taught protocol. Verified. He paused. Physical injury cleaned before documentation. Silence followed, not shock, assessment. The official inhaled slowly. "You are drawing connections that may not exist." "I'm stating observations," he said. "Connections are optional." The supervisor shifted his weight. "You should have escalated." "I did," the guard replied, and was reassigned. That landed, not as accusation but as sequence. The advisor spoke then, carefully. "Where did you obtain access to this room?" The guard did not answer immediately. "Architectural archive," he said. "Legacy access." The official's gaze hardened, just perceptibly. That key was retained for a reason. "Yes," he said, "so was the signal." The child's foot swung once, not reaching the floor. The movement was small, contained. He noticed the official notice it too. "This can be handled internally," the official said, quietly, without expansion. He understood the offer. Resolution without record, care without consequence. The palace excelled at such endings. He looked at the child, then back to the official. "The signal was sent twice," he said, "and answered once." The supervisor exhaled through his nose. "You're placing us all in a difficult position." "I know," the guard said. The radio on his chest vibrated again, insistently now. He ignored it. The advisor tapped the tablet once, bringing up a form. "If we proceed formally, there will be scrutiny," she said. "External." "Yes," he said. "And if we don't, he official added, "there will be stability." The guard considered the room, the careful lamp, the unlogged chair, the way the child had learned to sit still and wait. Stability had been here already. It had required silence. "I'm requesting immediate protective custody transfer," he said. "Medical evaluation logged. Independent." The supervisor looked at the official. The official looked at the advisor. A triangle of authority measuring cost. "You don't have that authority," the supervisor said finally. The guard met his eyes. "I have the responsibility," he said, not louder, not softer. The child lifted one hand again, slowly, fingers spreading, held. No one spoke. The transfer happened without ceremony. That was its mercy. The child was escorted through a service route cleared minutes earlier, corridors emptied under the pretext of a routine drill. The guard walked 2 steps behind, close enough to intervene, far enough to avoid spectacle. A medical officer accompanied them, expression unreadable, hands steady as she checked vitals and asked questions that required only nods. No one spoke of blame. Not yet. Language shifted to logistics, transport timing, documentation sequence, continuity of care. Words designed to move bodies without moving meaning. At the secure medical suite, the guard paused at the threshold. This was the line his authority could not cross without invitation. The medical officer nodded once, a professional acknowledgement, and closed the door. The lock engaged with a soft mechanical certainty. He remained in the corridor, back to the wall, listening to the hum of equipment inside. The palace did not intrude here. That was the point. His radio finally came alive. Command requested his presence in administrative review. The tone was neutral. The timing was not. The review room was larger than the side chamber, brighter, less discreet. Windows faced inward, offering the illusion of transparency without exposure. The official, the advisor, and the supervisor were already seated. Additional faces appeared on the screen, oversight representatives brought in quickly, their inclusion both consequence and shield. The guard stood. He did not sit unless told. The advisor summarized events in careful sequence, each phrase balanced. The missing seconds, the signal, the access, the injury, no adjectives, no conclusions. When asked to speak, the guard limited himself to confirmation. Yes, correct, logged, observed, the facts held without embellishment. Your actions exceeded protocol, the supervisor said finally. Yes, the guard replied. And yet, the advisor added, they did not violate statute. Silence settled again, heavier this time. The palace had rules for errors and rules for breaches. It had fewer for actions that landed between. The official folded her hands. There will be consequences, she said. Reassignment, review, this will not be invisible. I understand, the guard said. What you did, she continued, forces us to examine procedures we prefer not to. He did not respond. Examination was not his domain. The meeting concluded without resolution. Investigations required time. Time required distance. He was placed on temporary leave, effective immediately, framed as precautionary. His access credentials were suspended with formal politeness. As he left the room, the palace seemed unchanged. That, too, was intentional. He retrieved his belongings from the locker, uniform pressed, equipment accounted for. The evidence sleeve was taken by oversight, logged with signatures that made it real in a way silence never could. The secure drive followed, its checksum verified again. At the exit he paused. The guard on duty there was younger, posture straight, eyes curious but respectful. They exchanged the briefest nod. Outside, the air was cooler, less managed. The palace rose behind him, stone indifferent to process. His phone vibrated once, a message routed through an external channel. Medical cleared, protective status confirmed. He read it twice, then locked the screen. For the first time since the blackout, he allowed himself to stand still without listening for footsteps. Behind him, the palace doors closed softly.